Good evening, live from ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. A cold Harare. The winter is really here. This is The Chase. Our discussion tonight, Zimbabwe's political dialogue. Is it the gateway to economic transformation? Live broadcast is brought to you by ZANU-PF's TV network, ZTN, and our broadcast partners, Capitalk, Nyami Nyami FM and Diamond FM, and our sponsors, Zimbabwe Council of Churches and 4May. To our millions of viewers out there watching us live on Facebook, we want to hear from you. Please pass your comments through our Twitter handle at ZTN News and also our Facebook page, ZANU-PF's TV Network. We want to hear your voice, so make sure that we do. Good evening, I'm Andy Hodges.
And I am Linda Muriro. To our audiences throughout Africa, America, Europe, the Middle East and Asia, we say in Shona, Makadini, hello, Tigashire, welcome to The Chase.
To our esteemed panelists, you'll be asked to respond to a question and given 1 minute to make your submissions. Although interjections may be inevitable from time to time, please keep them civil yet vibrant and make your contributions through Linda and myself. Our values here at ZTN are dignity, dialogue and debate.
Now, we kindly ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves to our audience.
Start with Priscilla.
I'm Priscilla Misairabwi. I'm a member of parliament, MDC-T.
I'm Nyaradzi Paul Mangwana, Secretary for Legal Affairs, ZANU-PF.
Temba Nisswa, legislator for Norton constituency.
Sana Moyo, the presidential candidate and head of the Alliance for the People's Agenda, APA.
Now, we did have two other panelists from the MDC Alliance and also from the National Constitutional Assembly, Professor Maduku. They should be coming and joining us a bit later. Unfortunately, they've been a bit delayed. Now then, getting into our program. All Zimbabweans can agree that dialogue, not just between political parties, but also at citizens' level, should be done as a matter of urgency. You know, the old adage goes, too many cooks spoil the broth. But actually, I believe in Zimbabwe, we need a lot of cooks to try and help us out of our economic situation. Have a look at this and see some background on this issue.
Political crossroads post the First Republic era and the subsequent 2018 election, which led to the birth of the Second Republic. The country is currently facing economic challenges which many have attributed to the toxic political climate that existed during the tenure of the First Republic. Some political actors often argue that the country's obtaining economic problems emanate from a contaminated political environment which often produces contestable electoral outcomes. President Mnangagwa has responded to those assertions by setting up a political actors dialogue which seeks to institute some political reforms into the country's statutes and resolve the current political standoff. However, some political players have boycotted this important platform, calling for a neutral arbiter and venue as some of the preconditions to join the dialogue. The Zimbabwe Council of Churches is at the forefront in driving dialogue between all players in Zimbabwe and to use dialogue as a way to solve economic challenges. The mission of the Council is to facilitate the empowerment and renewal of member churches so that they have a sustainable, transforming Christian presence in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has been waiting for such a time in peace and humility. ZCC believes that hate speech should stop and God will heal the nation, and it can be done through the National Peace Dialogue process. ZCC believes Zimbabweans should lead the talks without seeking an external hand. The ZCC is concerned about the current economic challenges the country is facing, and it believes it has a role to play in fostering an environment where brother meets brother, sister meets sister, in the spirit of sharing and nation building. Therefore, the Zimbabwe Council of Churches is sponsoring this episode of The Chase, Zimbabwe's political dialogue. Is it the gateway to economic transformation? This discussion will help us all understand what is holding back the process, what are the issues to be discussed, and why some political parties are not willing to participate in such an important event that may assist to solve the economic challenges Zimbabwe is facing.
Brother meets brother, sister meets sister. Dialogue is the key. Now, let's jump straight in here. Unfortunately, MDC Alliance is not here, but they're on record as saying that they want genuine and sincere dialogue that ultimately must benefit all Zimbabweans, and the national dialogue is part of the unfinished liberation struggle. Now, Nkosana, your party itself, you started in the process, you joined the dialogue process, and then you pulled out. Maybe you could exemplify to us, why did you pull out? What were the major reasons?
Firstly, Why did we join? Why did we attend the first meetings? Because we believe that dialogue is important. We need to build a cohesive Zimbabwe, and I don't think anybody would dispute that. But I think there are certain processes and procedures that should be respected right off the bat if the dialogue is going to be successful. Firstly, I think there has to be an acknowledgement that the parties that come to sit around a table must respect each other and treat each other as equals for that to mean something. And I think the composition of who sits around that table has to speak to what you intend to do. If you're calling it a national dialogue, it must be seen, the people sitting around the table must be seen to be representative of the masses of this country. The minute you don't meet that requirement, then I think there is a problem, just in terms of the legitimacy of the problem, of the process. So when we went, we accepted the invitation. Then the dialogue was termed as a political parties dialogue. And we said, fine, if you call it a political parties dialogue and you argue that political parties represent Zimbabweans, then at the very least in that room, you need to have the two major political parties. Because this country virtually split 50-50 between ZANU and MDC-A. If one of those is not in the room, then there must be a problem. Or you could follow a different formulation which says you identify stakeholders more broadly, including the churches and the trade unions, because all Zimbabweans who belong to political parties will also tend to belong to some other stakeholder platform. So you could get representation that way. And both those suggestions were not taken up. And so, we, in our opinion,
sorry if I interrupt, but are you saying then that you believe that the dialogue should not just only involve political parties, but also the common citizen as well, putting their views? But don't the political parties represent those views?
How many people of this population vote? It's a minority. And therefore, if you actually stick to the numbers and respect what those numbers are telling you, the dialogue has to include more than just political parties.
Thank you. Temba, do you have any comment on the issues about why certain political parties are not going to get involved, or why they should or shouldn't? Do you have any views?
First of all, I really laugh at a national dialogue when the political parties themselves should dialogue first before a national dialogue. They have problems amongst themselves. And why do you want to take it a step further before you can deal with your own internal problems? That's my submission. ZANU-PF has problems. I'm an example of the problems within ZANU-PF. MDC has problems. She is also an example of that. So the parties themselves are split. So you're then dealing with injured people instead of the healing taking place at that level. We also have the aspect which I totally agree with Nkosana, is that the majority of the people don't belong to political parties. And why then should you put political parties in the forefront? The majority of the people who vote don't belong to political parties. And if you want to further examine that, look at how many members ZANU-PF has registered, how many members MDC-A has registered, and compare to how many vote. So basically, there are those in the middle who are the majority. So you don't have them part of the dialogue. So who then are you talking to? This is where the independent comes in at the end of the day. I say to myself, I represent everyone, and both ZANU-PF, MDC, and people who also don't belong to parties, for national interest, Parties' interests are for the party. The party is first, not the nation. So who then do we have who has national interest first to be able to push this agenda? So I think that needs to be scrutinized, and I think it needs to have an overview of whether the people sitting there are the right people or not. We also have the situation of us seemingly thinking that, national dialogue must happen now. It's an ongoing process. Mother and father talk every day. The moment that they cease to talk, there's a problem. So why should this one be unique? the country must be talking all the time. So it's a process which at any level is required for us to achieve any intended goal.
Thank you. Paul, ZANU-PF, of course, has been in the forefront of this dialogue. President Mnangagwa himself actually launched it. What would be your comments to what Temba and Nkosana said?
I think we need to clarify issues. Dialogue takes place at different levels. Within labor, there can be dialogue on labor matters. Within economical issues, there can be dialogue on economics. And we have this particular dialogue process is political. So when you are calling people for political dialogue, you call political parties. But that does not stop dialogue taking place in other spheres of life. So President Mnangagwa requested political parties to come and have political dialogue. So what is taking place is political dialogue. That is the reason why political parties were invited.
But you say
that does not stop dialogue taking place in other spheres.
Okay, but you say this, does that mean that the political parties themselves, they sit down, can come up with solutions to our issues?
Sure, they can. They can sit down and say, what are the political problems facing Zimbabwe today? Can we resolve those? Are they constitutional matters? Are they electoral? Do we require electoral reforms? How do we coexist as political parties? How do we enrich our political sphere? How do we make citizens participate in politics freely? So we can discuss that, and that is the very type of dialogue which is taking place right now.
I think just to come in there, and I think my brother Paul must answer this. I'm independent. I don't belong to a political party. I sit in the House of Assembly. I got 17,000 votes, MDC 7 and ZANU-PF 4. So how do you then miss this person with 17,000 and you take the 7 and the 4?
I'm sure I can be invited without any problem.
With
these 17,000 votes.
Okay.
But can I just, this is fascinating because I think there is, part of what I think there is a danger of here is the ruling party, which supposedly won an election on the basis of presenting a program to the population, trying to fudge the issue of its lack of delivery, and almost trying to silence the voice of opposition by making them appear to be party to the lack of delivery. Because if this dialogue is supposed to be a national dialogue, we need to be very clear about what is in the basket of the agenda which can be dialogued upon, and what is in a separate basket where the executive must be held to account to deliver. So it's not going to be easy for you to, as a ruling party, to fudge the issue and try to essentially bring the opposition parties to share with you a lack of delivery.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Priscilla, please, thank you.
Yeah, I was beginning to worry that you don't seem to be following your process properly. I think for me, let's be conceptually right, because facts are sacrosanct. If we start saying things that are not true, we have a problem. First, the fact number one, it's not a national dialogue. It's a political dialogue, which is why it's called pollard. It's for those political parties and those actors who were presidential candidates in the last election. That's the point to which this process started from. So let's get that right. No one has claimed that this political parties dialogue is the one that is the one and all. In fact, the reason why there was a decision to make it a political dialogue was to say we cannot ourselves pretend that because we are political parties, therefore we represent everybody else. That was a clear conversation. Thirdly, the dialogue itself has not started. When my colleague Nkosana left, we had not even started the dialogue. We were talking around the framework. How is this thing going to happen? And some of the things that he's talking about, if they had just been patient enough, he may have found that it was actually answered in the conversations that we had. Because one of the things we spoke about was to say, let's ensure that all these other stakeholders that want to engage can engage in their own sectors. So the churches should be allowed to engage in their own sectors. Then if after some time we then decide that let's have a great indaba, we then do that. Nisswa, the issue around political parties and their own problems and their violations is on the table. It's part of the issues on the agenda. One of the questions that political parties had to answer is, how do we begin to say political parties or at a national level, you need to live by your national constitution, if you yourselves as political parties cannot? How do you ask a government to be democratic if you as political parties are not democratic? How do you become a political party if you can't be registered and can't follow certain processes and certain rules? How do you become a political party that speaks against violence when speaks against violence at a national level when you as political parties yourselves are perpetrators of that violence? So the dialogue is taking place in different tracks. There are tracks that are going to be saying, let's do an introspection about ourselves as political parties and be open to ourselves and criticize each other. If there is need for doing legislative issues, let's do that. But let's also set agendas like Paul Mangwana has indicated. We agreed on certain things that we would want, and it's a wide range of those things, including some of the things that our colleagues walked away from. For example, the issue of legitimacy is on the agenda. And we said, let's talk about it. What is the issue around legitimacy? What do you define as legitimacy? But unfortunately, I think people jumped before they even had understood where we're coming from, because the dialogue has not started.
So, Priscilla, given what you've just said, can the political dialogue progress fruitfully without the other parties?
Well, my position is that if you are going to say it's voluntary and it's democratic, at the beginning of this process, all political parties were invited. Some political parties decided that they were not going to come in. So for me, let's respect the fact that those that do not want to come in should be allowed not to come in. But if we have that respect, also respect that those that are participating have a right to participate. What I have a problem with is to make an assumption that because I have decided to participate, therefore I've been co-opted and I've been captured. And I find that really demeaning. Because in other words, you're saying your decision to not be part of, therefore implies that I'm not good enough. I'm okay with you walking out. I'm okay with you staying out. You probably have a better strategy. But for goodness sake, respect me and my strategy, because I think I want to engage. You don't want to engage, and I respect you not wanting to engage. But don't force me to follow what you want.
So, Nkosana, can you justify pulling out? Was it worth your salt as a politician pulling out at the initial stages of this process, given what Priscilla has said, that some of the concerns have been put on the table?
The way she's framed it, actually, I can choose to participate or not participate. It's not national. It's introspection by a little group of people who want to have a conversation amongst themselves. They've got every right to do that. I don't have to be there.
And it is okay.
The way she's framed
and it is okay, but don't say it's about conversations about ourselves. I was answering Nisswa. It's a broader conversation. For me, it allows me to sit with government and to say to them, soldiers are being said to be abusing people in the street. What is the problem? What is inconsistent about it?
You now have jumped into a national level.
But what stops me?
You said it's political parties.
No,
be consistent.
But political parties have a right to engage on national issues. What is your problem?
Have to be there, so we can agree.
But I'm not forcing you, Nkosana.
All right, thank you. I think that
don't insult me for participating.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for that.
Is now using other political parties to justify themselves. That's an insult. Why are you insulting me for participating?
Now we know. Remember, the debate is not about.
She says I insulted.
The debate should not be insulted.
I wanted to explain how I insulted.
It's an insult to say to me I'm participating in a process because I'm legitimizing ZANU-PF. And that's what you said. Yes, you said ZANU-PF.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Okay, can I jump in? Thank you. We need to ask a question. Paul, MDC Alliance, for example, okay, we talk, Nkosana mentioned the fact that you mentioned the fact it's political parties and people sitting down. The MDC Alliance have come out quite strongly and said there will be no progress on this national dialogue without them. What are your thoughts about that?
They do not hold Zimbabwe at ransom. They are not more important than the Zimbabwean people. They are a political party who got some votes. That is now history. So if they want to join the political dialogue process, they are free to come. If they decide not to, it's their political choice, but they do not hold Zimbabwe at ransom.
Timber, any comments on,
this
on
is
what
where,
the MDC said?
This is where the independent needs to come in to now mediate, you see, because certainly there's got to be somebody with reason, and I see these emotions from the political parties, and I'm like, you know, I thank God I'm not part of this. But I think what is important is to, first of all, recognize that dialogue must be there, and it's a good thing that it is there. The other issue is who wants to be part of that dialogue, who is part of the dialogue. And I think it must also be able to accommodate others along the way. I personally have spoken about the independent. And there's some presidential candidates who have got more votes than from a constituency point of view. That is a fact. Okay. And I say to myself, okay, so how come the others are being left out? I'm hoping that in the framework, you'll be able to accommodate others as you see that it's for everyone. At the same time, I think people have a right either to participate or not to participate, but dialogue is an ongoing process. In terms of the ruling party, I always say that if you're part of this country, you need to associate yourself with the ruling party because it is the governing party. The policies come from there. But you equally need to be associated with the biggest opposition party. Say, I'm going to the MDC Congress. Okay, I went to the ZANU-PF conference. Because you cannot then understand the dynamics of the country when you don't then attend the ruling party's conference, hear how they're going to make their resolutions, how they impact on people. I belong to a constituency where everyone is Maim Juru, Nkosana Moyo, ZANU-PF. So when I'm going there, I'm representing the people from my constituency who have diverse views and belong to different political parties at the end of the day. In terms of the agenda, I think the agenda is what must be spelled out clearly. I see that Nkosana has an understanding of an agenda which he believes must happen. And I think Priscilla also says that I think it was too early for people to step out. My point is clear. Paul comes from the ruling party. We won the election, which is true. The opposition says you did not win. Does that mean that you cannot talk? You continuously have to talk, and each day as it comes, there are different things.
Now, allow me to come in. Paul, can there be genuine dialogue without the involvement of one of the key political players?
They made a choice not to participate. They cannot hold Zimbabwe at ransom. They are not Zimbabwe. Then Zimbabwe is bigger than a political party. The president invited every political player to come to the table.
Some would
People made a choice not to participate. We can't force them.
Some would ask why the ruling party would waste so much time and resources by engaging in dialogue with players who have left an insignificant mark on the political landscape.
No one is insignificant in politics. You can't live in the past.
Judging by the numbers
you cannot live in
that
the past.
Came through the ballot.
We do not know how much support the MDC Alliance has today. We know the support it got during the election process, which is past. So every political player is important. There is no bigger opposition party than another. So ZANU-PF recognizes and respects every political player in Zimbabwe.
Yet when we talk about the urban footprint, the opposition has an upper hand compared to ZANU-PF.
I do not know that. I know how they performed in the last election. I do not know how they would perform if elections would be called today.
Can I move that discussion? Because I find it really problematic. Firstly, I think the issue around a dialogue that is not about negotiating for power are two different things altogether. If we're talking about people wanting to come up into a coalition, of course you could go into that discussion and say we are talking about a coalition, we are talking about an inclusive government, to which some of us were part of last time. You are sitting there because you are talking about power sharing. In this instance, for some of us, sitting on the table has nothing to do with the power sharing arrangement. What brings me to the table is the fact that I'm a Zimbabwean. What brings me to the table is about me wanting to make a difference for my own country. It has nothing to do with whether I have 4 people or 5 people. It is not a representative issue. This is why I said facts are sacrosanct. When we came to the table, the first issue was to say, some of you contested in the election in 2018. You obviously had ideas about where you thought this country would go. We want to embrace you, just like what is happening with Ramaphosa. If you listened to the fantastic conversation and discussion that was raised by Malema today, it had nothing to do with who the numbers were. They were basically saying, we contested these elections, we have ideas. You know what, Mr. President, we want to embrace you. We want to work together. And that's what Ramaphosa said. So for us, when we are sitting there, it's not punching numbers. I punched numbers when we're doing the inclusive, because then I needed to know how many ministers we're going to get, how many PSCs we're going to get. Right now, the issue around conversations of numbers is not on the table. The issue is, can I look at Idi Mnangagwa in the face and say, I have a problem with what the soldiers are doing? What is it that we can do about it? I have no problem when the church has an opportunity to sit and ask that same problem. But the issue around numbers is done. The election is finished, guys.
We'll have to take a break, but don't worry, we'll be coming back and you continue with your thoughts and we'll come to you on Ikosana. So anyway, thank you. You can see the discussion is lively and vibrant. As we said, this is the chase. Our discussion tonight, Zimbabwe's political dialogue. Is it the gateway to economic transformation? And of course, this live broadcast is brought to you by Zimbabwe's TV network, ZTN, and our broadcast partners, Capi Talk, Nyami Nyami FM, and Diamond FM. And we'd also like to thank our sponsors, Zimbabwe Council of Churches and May. So therefore, please join us after the breather. The dialogue in Zimbabwe. You can hear what's going on. You'll have your views. Welcome back to The Chase, here live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Our discussion tonight, Zimbabwe's political dialogue. Is it the gateway to economic transformation? Once more, this is a live broadcast, of course, from Zimbabwe's TV network. We'd like to thank our broadcast partners, Capi Talk, Nyami Nyami FM and Diamond FM, and also our sponsors, Zimbabwe Council of Churches and May. Now, we do have some background, having to look and seeing what this dialogue is about. Have a look at this video and see. This is what we're talking about today.
Zimbabwe is at a political crossroads post the First Republic era and the subsequent 2018 election, which led to the birth of the Second Republic. The country is currently facing economic challenges, which many have attributed to the toxic political climate that existed during the tenure of the First Republic. Some political actors often argue that the country's obtaining economic problems emanate from a contaminated political environment, which often produces contestable electoral outcomes. President Mnangagwa has responded to those assertions by setting up a political actors dialogue, which seeks to institute some political reforms into the country's statutes and resolve the current political standoff. However, some political players have boycotted this important platform, calling for a neutral arbiter and venue as some of the preconditions to join the dialogue. The Zimbabwe Council of Churches is at the forefront in driving dialogue between all players in Zimbabwe and to use dialogue as a way to solve economic challenges. The mission of the Council is to facilitate the empowerment and renewal of member churches so that they have a sustainable, transforming Christian presence in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has been waiting for such a time in peace and humility. ZCC believes that hate speech should stop and God will heal the nation, and it can be done through the National Peace Dialogue process. ZCC believes Zimbabweans should lead the talks without seeking an external hand. The ZCC is concerned about the current economic challenges the country is facing, and it believes it has a role to play in fostering an environment where brother meets brother, sister meets sister, in the spirit of sharing and nation building. Therefore, the Zimbabwe Council of Churches is sponsoring this episode of The Chase, Zimbabwe's political dialogue. Is it the gateway to economic transformation? This discussion will help us all understand what is holding back the process, what are the issues to be discussed, and why some political parties are not willing to participate in such an important event that may assist to solve the economic challenges Zimbabwe is facing.
Well, here, of course, on The Chase, we'd also like to thank another broadcast partner, Voice of America, that's also beaming out live to 80 subsidiary channels and millions of people around the world.
Now, Paul, how will this political dialogue take the nation forward?
Well, the political parties are sitting on the table to deal with the current challenges facing the country. If there are issues which require legislative reform, they obviously sponsor and suggest to Parliament the areas of the law which require improvement. If certain issues require simple engagement, then that will be done. If there are economic policies which require to be changed, through this dialogue process, suggestions will be made, will put on the table, and then it will be up to the government now to take those on board and make the necessary reforms. So the most important thing is that the ruling party is talking to other political stakeholders and taking their views into account, and then implementing suggestions which will come from the political players in the country.
That sounds fine, as Paul has said. However, he is implying that the government must take into account all the political parties' views and then implement them or not. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm sorry, I keep hearing this inconsistency about what the dialogue is and what they are trying to challenge, what the agenda is. The agenda keeps being portrayed as a national agenda. National challenges, the economy. The ZCC are sponsoring this. It would have been good, actually, if we had one of them, the representatives sitting here. I'm sure they sponsored it under the impression it was about the nation.
Nkosana, can we separate politics and national issues?
I'm just playing to you what I'm hearing. I'm hearing people who are trying to defend a very narrowly defined participation, and yet they are still at the same time trying to say the content is national, but we're going to exclude the majority of Zimbabweans from the process. That's what I'm hearing.
Okay, Priscilla, do you have a comment?
I'm not sure where this issue of exclusion is coming from. I can understand exclusion from Lisa's point of view, and I think that is legitimate. Because if one is saying, I was elected, I am in parliament, I'm the only independent, which is why it's called political actors. I am sure within the framework of what we launched as our code of conduct, that can be dealt with. But I'm failing to understand where this exclusion thing is coming from. Can I go back? Firstly, we have said to ourselves, we will sit down and we will put up an agenda. Which agenda we have now put up? Which agenda includes those who are sitting as political parties. Can you allow me to speak? We who are sitting as political parties have agreed here's an agenda. And I think Mangwana explained what that agenda is. And we have said, because we participated in the elections, we have ideas around how those things can be done. And yes, you are right, because we do have a governing party. I can't say they will take everything on board. Just like when I was in an inclusive government, we knew that the president is Robert Mugabe, and we knew that the senior party in that particular inclusive government was ZANU-PF. But it allowed some of us to sit there and be able to talk around some of these things. And I think it did make a difference. For example, during the inclusive government, you had a period where you had peace, because we're able to come and sit and say, there's something that is happening in March Central. What can we do about it? How do we work around re-engagement? I was part of the groups that went and engaged outside and explained why we had issues as Zimbabweans. I don't see the problem in doing some of those things, and it's part of our agenda as political actors. But we are also not stopping anybody else from doing the same. You know, it sounds as if somebody is saying because political parties are now talking, everybody else should not talk. Which is why I said, for me, if I were talking to ZCC, I would say perhaps ZCC should be thinking about, at the end of the day, since there are all these pockets of dialogues that are taking place, dialogue in parliament, dialogue by political parties, dialogue in business, how do we bring all these dialogues together in a huge indaba? And if ZCC thinks that they are in a position to be able to bring everybody together, that's what they should do. But this particular conversation cannot be seen to be exclusionary. It's about a group of people who are talking, but who are not stopping anybody else from talking.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, you keep mentioning the agenda, and I think it's one area that Zimbabweans are not very clear on. What is the agenda? What issues are actually on the agenda? Maybe I can start with you, Paul, and then we can move to the other.
I've mentioned that, in fact, there are 4 major areas. The dialogue has been put into about 4 major areas. One of them is the political environment, then the legislative reform issues. I think...
the legislative one is with the governance one.
Yeah.
Then we have the economic one. Then we have the socio-economic one, which brings in issues of where are women, where are the youths, what is happening, how can we create social cohesion. So there are different themes to which, different political parties will go into different subcommittees and have a conversation.
But I think what is key to answer Nkosana is that ZANU-PF did not come up with these agenda items. The political players sat down and said, right, we want to talk, but what do we want to talk about? And then people were put into various thematic groups, and they came up with the agenda items. If he had been patient, he would have realized that there was no dominant player who would say, let's talk about this, let's not talk about that. Everybody was involved in deciding the agenda items.
Nkosana, did you feel that as well? I mean...
No. So, you know, if you walked out of this room and went out into the streets and asked ordinary Zimbabweans about this dialogue, most people, I think, would say, I think, a dialogue is important. If you ask them why, they would see it as a platform, as a vehicle for helping this nation to solve its problems, its challenges, to, I think ZCC have actually also mentioned some of them, heal the nation. We've got a history which is very problematic in many... They see it as a national thing.
So you do agree that we cannot separate politics and national issues?
For me, yes. But for them, clearly, the two are separate. Was
it not premature, Nkosana, for you to pull out at the initial stages on the basis of disagreements around the agenda? Temba has rightfully said that it is a process. Aren't these some of the issues that are supposed to be brought to the fore?
You see, when you're wanting to have a conversation, it is really important that the people, right from the beginning, so at the moment there is already an agenda with all of these items, but a lot of Zimbabweans were not there to agree that these are the items. So you need to understand the process, how important it is. If you're wanting a national process, national representation is important at the beginning. Nobody has got a right to formulate an agenda in the absence of other national players. It cannot make sense.
Okay, thank you for that. Temba, you've heard some of the agenda items. Do you think that they fulfill the whole, encompass the everything dialogue? Do you think there should be other items on the agenda? And if they are, what would you put on that?
You know, we can skirt around issues. Let's be very clear. Do we want a dialogue between ED and Chamisa? Let's just try to dissect issues. If the MDC alliance and ZANU-PF met and all the other parties were not there, would people be happy? We want to ask that. And secondly, the political parties, other political parties have met, and it seems that people are not happy. I wanted to talk about ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF has sanctions, Zimbabwe sanctions, because of the ZANU-PF government. But has that stopped them from moving on? They've moved on. But do they believe having them struck off helps? Yes, it does. So the same attitude must also be extended to the political parties that are not involved. Continue to dialogue with them, because that's hypocrisy. Sanctions are hitting us, but we're still lobbying for them to go. We are engaging with the West, but we're not prepared to engage with our own. There's got to be sincerity in doing this. And there's nothing that stops...
Let me correct you. We have not refused to talk to Nkosana and others who are not part of the national dialogue. If they want to come tomorrow to the national dialogue process, they are welcome.
The doors are open.
But you see, what I'm saying at the end of the day is it's pretty clear that they have gone and some have pulled out. MDC-A, led with Chamisa, which is the biggest opposition party, is not there. This is where the church comes in, okay? Watching and talking to, because the political parties, the governing party and the biggest opposition will not, because the opposition, biggest opposition sees itself as the government in waiting and the political party, the ruling party is governing. So let's now talk about that whilst the train is moving, what are we doing to get more people to be part of the train? This is where magnanimity comes in. This is where the country must be bigger. What I find difficult with all the political parties here is that I don't see anybody with that magnanimity in this country to say, we have had our problems, let's forget about them. Within your own parties, I go back to their parties. I've not heard ZANU-PF saying, whatever happened, happened, come back. I've never heard MDC say, whatever happened, happened, come back. Charity begins at home. Rwanda is where it is because Kagame himself, with the genocide there, was able to unite that country. That's the reason why Rwanda is where it is.
I think we've now officially heard, I think ZANU-PF here, Sipho Mangwana, basically saying if the parties have pulled out or they want to come and get involved in the process now, that is possible. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, perfect.
This is a Zim Papers television network, a ZTN production, and we are coming to you live from the ZTN headquarters in the capital of Zimbabwe, Harare. And now, Paul, Zimbabweans are watching. They are following the political dialogue with keen interest. Are there any timeframes as to concluding on the issues of the agenda or what it seeks to achieve?
Right now, what has been agreed to is a framework for the dialogue, the agenda, issues to be discussed during the dialogue process. And as we move on, timeframes will now be set to say how long are we going to be involved in this and how long will this take and so on and so forth. Because it's a process we are going through by agreement with everybody. So no one is saying you must agree within 3 months on this, 4 months on that. We are still discussing those issues. But
we'd hope that this isn't going to be a years and years. Surely this is something that should be done now and immediately. Should look at you.
But you see, just to come in though, I think I have a problem with you calling it a ZANU-PF issue. I think let's be very clear. It's beyond ZANU-PF. And I think this is where I probably hear Nkosana saying, this is, once all political parties are there, it becomes a national issue. And ZANU-PF, being the governing party, is also a political party, which happens to be the ruling party, but when it comes to negotiations, everybody has got the same power. So I think let's not make this a ZANU-PF thing, because you then make it, you know, not seemingly to be a national issue.
Good point.
But let's be realistic. And for me, this is deja vu. When we started the conversations, at least around the inclusive government, exactly these conversations were on the table. Because some of our colleagues then, led by Changirai, were refusing to come and have a conversation. There were loads of attacks on Thabo Mbeki. There were loads of attacks on some of us as sellouts. But as people began to realize the benefits of those conversations, people came on board. So I'm not bothered. I don't think at this stage anybody can say people are happy or unhappy. People will always be circumspect. And it's okay for people to be circumspect. They will see whether it does make a difference, which is why I don't have any reason to attack anybody who has not come on board. Because I'm saying, you know, it's okay for you to suspect that something is not going to come of it, but you may actually sit back when you begin to see things moving. And which is why, to a certain extent, we're saying to our colleagues in ZANU-PF, it is in your interest to ensure that the things we are talking about are seen to be done, because you are the ones who are on the driving seat. That is what is going to encourage everybody else who thinks this is a joke. This is about, playing games. This is about creating a certain legitimacy around somebody. Some of us are genuinely sitting there because we think we can make a difference. And we will be raising issues that can move us forward. But I'm not blaming anybody who still thinks, will ZANU-PF really take you seriously? Will you move? And I'm not here to vouch that ZANU-PF is going to take us seriously. They may not. And I'm able to then walk out and say, you know what? I gave this a chance. I sat down. I raised issues. I said to these guys, we need to be working together. They did not. But I'm not going to stop doing it before I even try.
Okay, thank you. Now, there is something you mentioned.
Can I also just correct something here? This is not the only forum where ZANU-PF is involved in dialogue.
What other forums are
we have a process which has been taking place for the political parties which are represented in Parliament. And the MDC Alliance is participating in that dialogue process. So this is a second forum which is involving other political parties which are not necessarily represented in Parliament. But we also have another one which is being sponsored by Zimbabwe Institute and the European Union. So that dialogue process is also taking place side by side. On this one, MDC Alliance is involved. So I thought I should just correct
No, that's okay. So how are you managing to marry all of these dialogues? I mean, if you have 5 or 6 or 7 different dialogues in different forums, how is it all coming into one area?
The political parties represented in Parliament discuss matters of a legislative nature because they are pushing whatever they've agreed to into Parliament. This is where we agreed on the we actually agreed on the do's and not do's during the electoral process. That came out through this dialogue process involving political parties represented in Parliament. And therefore, there are 2 dialogue processes taking place. In one sector, the MDC Alliance is participating. In the other one, they refuse to participate.
But for me, this is why I keep saying what we need now is somebody who is able to facilitate a coming together of a great endeavor of these separate dialogues. Sure. I personally would have a problem if a political party dialogue started taking or assuming a role that they will be the ones who bring everybody on board. I don't think we can do so. I think we have actually some problems in doing that. But I think another group can then say, look here, there are all these different things that are taking place. How do we strategically bring these things together? How do we get the whole nation talking? Because what I see ultimately is to facilitate a Zimbabwe that talks. And for some of us, we think one of the biggest problems has been this whole thing that it's about negotiating. Lancaster was about negotiating. ZANU was about negotiating. Inclusive government was about negotiating. It was about a small group of people who were negotiating around. We have never really had a country that speaks. So we are just leading some process of speaking as political parties, but surely we should be encouraging other sectors to speak.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, there's something you mentioned earlier about on the agenda or on the table, and that's the issue of legitimacy. Now, maybe we could talk to that if you don't mind, Paul. This has been put on the agenda item. Maybe just briefly say to us, what is this issue about legitimacy and what is it talking about on the agenda item?
Well, we hear voices which say that President Idi Mnangagwa did not win an election. So we simply said, look, if some people have this in their minds, let's talk about it. Not that we accept that view, because the Constitutional Court, being the highest court in the land, endorsed the election. But we simply said, let's discuss it and put a full stop to it, to say, in view of the pronouncement by the Constitutional Court, do you still have any issue on this? Because we believe that those who are questioning the legitimacy of President Mnangagwa's selection are doing so for political reasons. They don't believe in what they are saying. They know that the highest court in the land endorsed the election. They know that they could have asked for a recount of the votes if they had any doubt about it. They did not do so. They did not want to open up the ballot boxes because they knew there was nothing they were going to find. But we simply say, let's put an end to this discussion. Let's talk about it, and then we can raise all these arguments while we are talking.
But if the main opposition party that is actually saying these issues about President Idi Mnangagwa, legitimacy and so on, is not sitting at the table, who actually is discussing?
We can't force them.
No, who's discussing it?
We are discussing with the political players who are interested in discussing the legitimacy issue.
But do you have a comment? So hang on, we'll come to you now.
No, I don't have a comment on this because I don't understand it.
But you see, but then I have a problem with you putting legitimacy on the agenda. unless you're also having to doubt your own power. I mean, the Constitutional Court ruled we are all bound by the courts. Why then are you undermining the courts by bringing the issue of legitimacy? There are three arms of the state, okay? And the other arm of the state says Mnangagwa is the president. I know, and it's been in the media that Nelson Chamisa has written to the president wanting to meet the president. We're not talking about that, okay? And the question should be, has the president accommodated him? These are the issues that we must talk about. I've not heard Nelson not refer to ED as president. He refers to him as president. Despite him having issues in what happened, but he still refers to him as president. So I would also want to say, okay, the letters that he wrote to the president, why have they not been attended to? Nkosana has a right to write to the president and get a response to the president. I know that Noah Manyika even gave me a letter to say that, take this to the president. But we also want to know that if these letters are being written to the president, how sincere are the people around the president in terms of getting these letters to him?
But can I correct something? Because I brought that subject. Don't make assumptions that the issue around legitimacy is just being raised by MDC Alliance, which is why he's saying the agenda was a collective agenda. One of the things that people said is, let's not take anything out. Everything should be on the table. And at this point, we are not taking decisions and we are not saying this is what is right and this is what is not right. If the issue around legitimacy is a conversation, let's talk about it. Let's understand where people are coming from, because issue of dialoguing is important. You can't choose what you want to speak about and say this, there are no conditions. So if somebody says, for example, one of the issues that was really problematic at the beginning as we crafted the dialogue was the issues around, some people were saying soldiers raped women. Huh? And others were saying, but we have no evidence. And we said, no, but that's not the issue. The issue is that somebody is talking about it. We put it on the agenda. We then have a conversation and say, how do we address that particular issue? If there is evidence, let's deal with the evidence. If there is no evidence, let's deal with evidence. One of the interesting things was the issue around sanctions. For example, our colleagues in ZANU-PF said, let's put it as illegal sanctions. It was already a debate, and we said, let's just put it as sanctions, and we debate it. So for me, no one has a right to put an issue on the table. I still have a problem in saying only one person has to put an issue on the table.
I think Themba and Priscilla have made some good points about this legitimacy issue. Have you any further comments on that?
Well, we do not refuse to have this matter on the agenda, because this is where you exercise the freedom to say every political party has a right to raise any issue, including the legitimacy, although we in ZANU-PF believe that it's not an issue to talk about.
Because as Themba said, you know, if you want to talk legitimacy, then you're implying
I think the constitution of the country is very clear. If you're not happy with the outcome of the elections, you go to court, and the court decides legitimacy.
That's the dialogue.
That's the dialogue.
If that is what is going to put an end to it, have that conversation. But
I have a problem being a legislator in that the court has ruled. Okay, the court has ruled. And what more are you going to discuss when the court has ruled? What will it change?
If you only debate
it's the first time.
Allow me to remind our audience that we had invited 6 panelists to this discussion, and we are hoping that the other 2 members of the panel will join us and be part of this conversation. That is a representative from the MDC Alliance and the NCA. Now, Nkosana, if you were to...
Unfortunately, we have to take a breather, unfortunately, because you see, even we're getting excited about this debate. Thank you. So we'll have to take a breather. We're live from ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Of course, we'd like to thank our broadcast partners, Capi Talk, Nyami Nyami FM and Diamond FM, and of course, the Voice of America, going out to millions of people worldwide, and our sponsors, Zimbabwe Council of Churches and For May. So please join us after the breather. You can see the conversation is getting better and better. We'll see you just now. Welcome back to The Chase. Our discussion tonight, Zimbabwe's political dialogue. Is it a gateway to economic transformation? Of course, we'll be remiss to not forget our broadcast partners, Voice of America, going out to 80 subsidiary channels, Capi Talk, Nyami Nyami FM and Diamond FM, and of course our sponsors, Zimbabwe Council of Churches and For May. Now, this is a part of our program where we hear from you. We've been monitoring our social media platforms, Twitter at ZTN News, and of course Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network. And so now we have some good questions for the panelists. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to some of our viewers and listeners out there. David Nsingo from Gweru, Visa D from Johannesburg, South Africa, Kolani Dube from Welma, Eastern Cape, Lucky Muzava, Harare, Sean Mack from Brighton, United Kingdom, Chris Guerra, Stockholm, Sweden, Amata Fadzwa from London, UK, Munyarazi Zepete from Harare, Zimbabwe. Thank you. And I'm sure I've missed out a lot of you, but don't worry, Zetian will not forget you all. Now then, let's jump into a few social media questions. Linda, you have something there?
Now, Tinofa Mutevedzi, all the way from Joburg in South Africa, says, should we really restrict this to political dialogue? Why not have a national one?
All right, maybe we can start from this side. And
well, you know, that's where I am. I believe that what we are confronting are national challenges. We need to get over this by coalescing as a people around a table and confronting our issues and finding ways in which we can deal with it.
What issues, Nkosana, would you want to see being put on the table for discussion?
Well, for instance, I would need to understand, and I think a lot of Zimbabweans are interested in understanding why there is such economic instability, why investment has not come back. We still suffer from a lot of unemployment. Corruption is still rife in this country. These are things that the nation is interested in. Why are these things not being solved?
Okay.
I totally agree. Even if the political actors agree and the economy does not address bread and butter issues, it means nothing. You say that this is the gateway to economic transformation. If that's the theme of where we are, and what is the theme to economic transformation? Other stakeholders must be brought in. Business must be brought in. Different stakeholders must be brought in so that we see the end to the economic transformation that we're talking about.
We have said during the political parties dialogue process, you can bring those economic and social issues. We did not close the door, but we said, let us start to talk as political players. But that does not stop other sectors of our society from discussing any issues they want to discuss. But the first problem we do have is a political one. It is politics which is very toxic in our country. It is politics which is making us fail to put our heads together to resolve all the socio-economic issues. Politically, we are not moving together as a country.
Priscilla, we'll have to ask you this question, which is interesting, and I'll open it to the panel as well. This is from @Solomon Mutizwa. Thank you, Solomon. If an agreement is reached, will they sign something, the political parties? Is it binding at law? I think this is about the confusion about Zimbabwe's in this dialogue program. I think it's important that we clarify this.
I think that's where I agree to some extent with Nkosana, that I think the messaging is problematic for a lot of people. This is not about agreeing to a negotiated process. It's different from going into a coalition. This is about saying the issues that we are raising here, what ideas do political parties have? And this is why when Nisswa says it's not an event, this is a process. And it's not only Zimbabwe that is this. This structure that we have around political parties is all over. Ghana is exactly the same thing. Zambia is exactly the same thing, which is why I was saying to you, if you listened to Malema's conversation, they are moving into the direction of engaging within the ambit of political parties.
Right. So, Priscilla, given that at the moment there are 17 parties forming part of this dialogue, where a majority of those parties were to say that the issue of power sharing should be on the agenda, what would be your sentiments around that? I
don't think there is a problem in any way. This is why I said we agree. The first thing is we said this is unconditional. Some of us are clear. I know that my political party is clear that this is not about going into a power sharing. As far as we are concerned, this election did not create a hung parliament. 2008, we went into a power sharing arrangement because we had a hung parliament. None of the political parties could run. I don't see that issue now. But I don't want to stop any other political party that thinks power sharing is an issue. I actually have a problem with any power sharing because we have had power sharing before. It has not worked. It has not moved us forward. What we need is a conversation.
Thank you. What you said, I want to just follow up from a question here from one of our viewers. Thank you. At T number 003. And it's back what you said about this is a dialogue setting an agenda. He asked, or he or she asked, what would a good result from dialogue look like? How do we know if it's successful? Because there must be some barometers, some checks to say, this worked, Paul. You know, we can't just sit and talk. We don't want another talk show. I know Zimbabweans are full of committees. We said a committee for this, a committee for that. We don't want a talk show. We want progress. What are the key result areas?
ZANU-PF's leader, President Mnangagwa, says he is a listening leader. You just don't listen. You listen, then act. So we in Zambia are very clear. We want to hear views from other stakeholders in our country. If we agree with those views, we will obviously put that into our program and implement them. But first of all, we must be able to listen to others.
But what you've just said, though, that you're saying that if we agree on those views, we implement them.
Yes.
It means that you are driving the process.
Oh, we have the right to run this country. We won an election. We have more than 2/3 majority in parliament. So we have the legitimate right to decide the fate of the country in the next 4.5 years.
Okay, maybe we should take some comments.
You know, I'm very clear on this, and I've been saying it of late, that I think we must not betray our people. November was a great month for our country. November 2017, the March, was a great month for Zimbabwe, where every Zimbabwean got out there. No one was arrested, no accident, no looting, nothing. Okay? And you'd never seen so many people. And the intention was very clear. May we see the Zimbabwe we want. The Zimbabwe we want was a Zimbabwe which would be inclusive. They must knowing very well that they wanted Mugabe out and ED was going to come in. And in doing that, they expected ED to have an inclusive government while he's the president. And this is where I want to speak to ZANU-PF and to the president that why can't we get that spirit moving again? It's not late. Yes, you serve your party. But everybody who marched that day was not ZANU-PF. They were looking for the best interest of this country, and trust was bestowed onto him to be able to come up with an inclusive government, which does not mean he's weak. He can fire any minister from any party. Nkosana is there, Andy Hodges is there, Priscilla is there, Paul Mangwana is there. You are the best team for this country. If you fail to perform, I'll use the powers. Okay, because the appointment of the ministers lies in the prerogative of the president, and no one argues with that. But it is the team that is Zimbabwean that we're looking for.
Kosana, maybe you could just...
So I think, Temba, you are only partially right. I agree with the sentiment that Zimbabweans wanted to see something different. But I think if today, if you woke up tomorrow and through some magic wand, ZANU was doing wonders in running this country, peaceful, prosperous, working economy, lots of employment, nobody would worry about whether there was a dialogue, whether it was inclusive. What Zimbabweans want is a country that is fundamentally different from what they've experienced in the last 30, almost 40 years. How that is achieved is partly, and this is where we need, again, Priscilla thought I was insulting her when I was talking to ZANU, I was not. This is where we need to be incredibly careful about accountability. Zimbabweans are wanting a country that functions, where the economy works, where there is peace.
Are those not the issues that you're supposed to be putting on the table, issues around accountability?
But that's where we need to also be careful. There is a government, we talked about legitimacy here, there is a government, there is an executive. So they want to talk to me about what?
Yet you say that this dialogue should be about national issues. Then can the political players agree as to what is the national interest or what are the national issues?
Please bear with me a minute. The whole process of an election is that Zimbabweans were given choices. Zimbabweans listened to different programs being offered. They read different manifestos. And then, presumably, if we're not going into the legitimacy issue, Zimbabweans chose. At the moment, what is happening is a failure to deliver on those promises. Zimbabweans want to see delivery on the promises made. If that happened, this conversation will not happen.
Paul, I think Paul, I think has to respond.
How can you say that we failed to deliver just 6 months into our term? We still have 4.5 years to deliver, and we are going to deliver. But we have said, as Zimbabweans, let us listen to other Zimbabweans. Let us hear your voices. Let us hear your suggestions. We do not have a monopoly to good ideas. The mere fact that we have been given the mandate to rule does not mean that we own the best ideas of running the country. It's our country together. Come, let's
Paul, can ZANU-PF come to this dialogue with an open ear that is genuine and ready to listen?
That is exactly the position. We are, and in fact...
Yet already you are disputing that you should not be held accountable as the ruling party on your failure to deliver.
We are not going to be held accountable. We are saying, let us listen to our fellow Zimbabweans who may have good ideas on this point and that point and that point. But the obligation and the right to run the country is with ZANU-PF. The ZANU-PF is accountable for the success or failure of the country during this period. It has the right to rule.
Thank you, Paul.
Perhaps I'm speaking like a female. I actually don't agree that if there is food in the house, that if everything seemingly is going well, we should not be talking. You get what I'm saying? I actually think. Can you give me an opportunity?
But don't misrepresent. Don't misrepresent.
Because I actually think you have a problem with me saying anything, and I actually have a problem with that. Can you just allow me to finish?
Please continue.
But I think there is a problem.
Please continue.
I actually think that what is fundamental for this country is actually not the things we are talking about. It's not the poverty. It's not fundamentally. The problem with this country is our inability to speak to each other. To speak to each other in a respectful manner, to speak to each other and agree on what is the broader vision that we have. Until you have all of you an appreciation of where you want to go, you will continue to have these problems. And I'm sorry, Nisswa, I actually also think that whole inclusive government created problems for us because it created a certain expectation in people. When an election is done, it is done. It is entirely up to that person to think, perhaps I want to pick Nisswa, I want to pick this. But it should not be at the center of the conversation. Unless there is a real reason for running for a coalition. People shouldn't go to an election in the hope that if I participate in the election, even if I lose, I will be brought into government. You have participated. If you lost, you lost. Then say to yourself, what then becomes my role? And which is why I said, for some of us as opposition political parties, I am saying, since I don't sit at cabinet, since I have no way of influencing, surely you are asking the question, what will be a success? Let me just tell you as a woman, the issues around women being abused is a real issue for me. There is an independent mechanism that is there in our constitution. The one thing that I'm going to be raising as my first issue is why do we not have that independent mechanism? So that tomorrow, if any woman is abused by a soldier, by a police person, we don't have to be thinking about whether it happened or not. So if I can have that independent mechanism coming out. So there are specific things that we can see. And if these guys don't deliver, this is why I said, I'll say,
you can hold them to account.
I tried.
Uncle Sana, you wanted to say something. So please.
Mr. Mangwana mentions that they've only been in power for 6 months. You know, I do not know how many of our development partners, investors you talk to. A lot could have been done by now. A lot of people are beginning to write off Zimbabwe. A lot of people came into this country in droves. They took up accommodation, rentals, and so on. They've cancelled them. They are going away. The time you are saying is too short. by standards of the world out there's been plenty time for a demonstration of direction of movement, and that has not happened.
Can I ask another listener? Sorry, before I'll come to you, Themba. Another question from our Facebook page is this dialogue by an admission by ZANU-PF that they have failed?
No, it's not. We are simply saying, whilst we have the democratic right to run the country until the next election, we must talk to other Zimbabweans. We don't have the monopoly of the interests of the people. We must also listen to our brothers and sisters in the opposition. This is all we are saying.
Okay, all right. Themba, you wanted to?
No, I think, listen, we must be honest. I think this is the arrogance of ZANU-PF that we don't want, where you say things are good when they're bad. I think let's be very clear, we're in Zimbabwe right now. And this is what people don't want to hear. Even the president himself admits that things are not good. And as such, there needs to be measures.
So a reminder to our audience.
So for ZANU-PF to be able to then say that things are good. ZANU-PF has...
I did not say things are good. No, I'm aware we have challenges.
But you see, but my point that there
we
is...
have challenges.
But there is no rule that says because you're in power for 5 years, people should suffer a month and then the election should be good. There's no rule. There's got to be consistency and people's lives must improve. We must look at Zimbabwe now and where we should be in terms of the things that we are known for. Education, human resource is there. What is it happening? You've got people outside Zimbabwe who are running blue chip companies and so forth. You've got James Manyika, who was just, even the country could not even honor him, even say, well done for achieving this. He's doing well in America, University of Zimbabwe, and so forth. We don't even, give respect to our own who are doing well out there. So the issue that must be understood, inclusivity does not mean you're weak. It does not mean you're weak. And the political environment in this country is too popularized. ZANU-PF must stop having hardliners. Things are fast changing. We've got too many hardliners who believe that ZANU-PF is the only one that can get things done. And to me, you have a president who's a reformist, who's a Democrat. For us to be speaking like this shows that there's some good things which happen.
I think you made a good point there. I mean, the social and political space has opened up. There's no doubt about that. I mean, let's give credit where credit is due. Paul, do you have any response to what Themba's been saying?
Well, my response to Themba is simply that we in ZANU-PF have said we don't have a monopoly to good ideas. We don't own the country as ZANU-PF. It belongs to all of us. So let's come to the big table and talk. If you have better ideas on this point and that point, we listen. But the right to run the country belongs to ZANU-PF. We are the party in government, and will be held accountable by the population come the next election. So if we can have some good ideas coming from our colleagues from the opposition, we'll take them on board and implement for the good of our country as a whole.
Unfortunately, we're coming.
And why should those ideas only come because people are in government? That's why I have a problem. If you have an opportunity to do it without necessarily sitting in government, you should be able to do it. So come and let's talk about it.
Let's go first. So very good point from both of them. So why are all of the other stakeholders not included?
We invited everyone.
I didn't say political. I said all the other stakeholders. Why are they not included in bringing these good ideas to the table?
Let me respond to Nkosana. I said this is political parties' dialogue process. It does not exclude all other forms of dialogue. The religious leaders may come up with another forum.
But you're not going to reach out to them.
There's a national economic forum in Zimbabwe. I'm sure you're aware, NECF, which is a forum to discuss economic issues. Those who are focused on economic matters will sit down and talk in that particular area. So there are many forums, areas through which we can dialogue, but this one is specific for political players.
But of course, the point there, of course, is that we need to put them all under one roof. I think you called it out in the Ndaba. At the end of it. Otherwise, you're going to have different discussions going on in different places. But if I can just ask this. What is the role of bodies like SADC and African Union, and also this issue about having a foreign mediator or facilitator in the dialogue? Is that something that has been rejected out of hand? What would be your comments? Maybe I should start with.
Well, I think SADC spoke at the launch of the national dialogue. They put their position. they said, as far as we are concerned, we are happy with the national process. However, if you think you want to add credibility to this process, bring somebody in. But as political parties, one of the things we agreed on is let this be a national-led process. Because if this dialogue is going to be going on for a long time, you don't want to be bringing somebody who comes in back and forth. So as far as we are concerned, because you are not negotiating a power sharing, you are facilitating a conversation among yourselves.
Can be done by Zimbabwe.
We now have the constitutional bodies like NPRC and the Gender Commission facilitating for that issue of convening.
Just very quickly.
That's our view also, that at this point in time, there is no need for outsiders to come in. They are not resolving a conflict. We are simply talking amongst ourselves.
Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the chase. However, we will give you each just an opportunity, very briefly, just to maybe make your final thoughts known. Maybe I should start with Uncle Sam.
Well, my position is not changed. I think a dialoguing process is really, really important. I think the challenges confronting our nation are such that if I were an advisor or if I were determining how this should be done, I would have gone out and identified all the key stakeholders, not just political parties only, stakeholders, because as you know, we pointed this out at the beginning, there are more Zimbabweans outside of political structures than within, and we're trying to deal with that.
Okay, thank you. Timber?
I think Zimbabweans are able to deal with their own issues. I think that's well... that's been done before. Restore Legacy was an issue which showed that when we want to come together and deal with an issue, we do. I think what is required is for us to mature politically. This is the process of maturing politically.
We in ZANU-PF believe that the only way we can take our country forward is through talking to one another. And the first challenge we have in the country is toxic politics. Let us remove toxicity in our politics. Once we do that, we'll be able to engage with one another in various other areas where we want solutions. But first of all, let us deal with our politics. This is why this dialogue process is very important.
I think the political parties' dialogue is important in that it is setting a standard for all the other sectors to say it is possible, even if you are coming from different ideas, you can still come together. And my point would be to encourage other stakeholders to follow suit and make sure that we start talking and then have the final great indaba. Well,
there we go. I mean, I think all of the political parties here and participants in the dialogue, some who are in, some who are out, have put their views known. You make up your own minds. I think they were very clear and eloquent about what they wanted. So that's it. The chase tonight. Our subject, of course, was Zimbabwe's political dialogue. Is it the gateway to economic transformation?
And so many questions coming through on social media as to why the MDC alliance is not represented. Well, they had been invited, and we certainly hope that we will have them in future programs on the chase. And this has been a Zim Papers television network, a ZTN production, coming to you live from Harare, Zimbabwe.
And of course, we'd like to thank our sponsors again, Zimbabwe Council of Churches and Formay, and our broadcast partners, Voice of America, going out to 80 stations around the world, Capi Talk, Nyami Nyami FM and Diamond FM. Thank you for tonight's broadcast and all of you listening. And of course, don't forget, next week, The Chase again, normal time, we'll be doing something, giving you a show, which of course is topical and something you'd like to follow. So all that's left for us is to thank our panelists. On behalf of me and Linda, thank you very much for such a spirited debate. And of course, on behalf of us, we'll see you next week on The Chase. So take care of yourselves and look after each other.
It's bye for now.